This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, it was a pretty quiet day in key markets across Africa, as of course they closed for the Eid al-Adha holiday. But broadly, emerging market stocks sank further today as worries over rising cases of COVID-19's Delta variant did drive broad moves out of risk-driven assets. MSCI's index of emerging market stocks fell 0.5% on the day, of course extending a 1.7% slide from Monday. However, South Africa's JSE All Share did climb over 1% today. It was on track to break a 3-day losing streak, and that's after falling the most in more than a week on Monday. All indices closed in the green. We saw the Resource 10 up over 2% on the day. Now, also coming up on today's show, South Africans brace for an increase in petrol and diesel prices. Tanzania sets up a task force to explore the introduction of cryptocurrencies. And Amazon founder and billionaire Jeff Bezos makes a successful trip into space. Well, we start off today's show in South Africa, where the mid-month data from the Central Energy Fund indicates that petrol is set for an increase of 87 South African cents per litre. Diesel is going to go up 58 cents and paraffin up about 56 cents. Now, the Automobile Association says it expects little respite before the month end. Here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola with the details.
The Automobile Association notes that while the slight hiccup in the supply of fuel will not push the price of fuel higher, the key driver of fuel price hikes is the weakening rand.
I mean, fuel prices were already trending higher before the widespread looting and unrest that beset South Africa a couple of days ago. The rand-US dollar exchange rate spiked at one point from 14 Rand 35 to nearly 14 Rand 80 since the 12th of June. And really, it's the increase in the value of the dollar against the rand, in other words, the weakening of the rand against the dollar, and this subtle increase of the oil price over the same period.
There was some concern that the unrest and arson on the main highways between KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng would lead to shortages at fuel stations. Added to which, SA Petroleum Refiners in Durban, which supplies 35% of South Africa's refined fuel, had declared force majeure and told its retail customers it wouldn't supply fuel until it was safe to do so.
It had an impact on the delivery of goods. It didn't have a major impact on the delivery of fuel in the sense that there were reserves in Gauteng to cater for that. And hopefully now that it's been reopened, normal procedure will return where goods, fuel and other cargo is delivered according to plan.
South Africa has another challenge. Diesel is used extensively to move goods and materials around the country.
Road is probably about 90% of all land transport in South Africa, and that relies on diesel. And even our trains, because the overhead electricity cables are often stolen, rely on diesel.
The price increase will have a material impact on the country's economy.
So any big increase in the diesel and in the petrol prices has a big bearing on the South African economy. So we expect a 5% increase to have a 0.2% increase in the total inflation rate directly, indirectly another 0.2% over the next year or so.
This latest in the series of fuel price increases is going to affect everyone, from consumers all the way to manufacturers and suppliers of goods and services. It's going to increase the price of everything. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And adding to Sudan now, the country is seeking debt relief so that it can open up its lines of credit with multilateral organizations as well as other nations. That will also allow it to receive new grants and loans at low or zero interest. Now, the cash-strapped nation badly needs the financing in order to overcome its prolonged economic crisis. Here's CGTN's Enoch Sikolia with more.
For years now, Sudan's state budget has been deep in the red amid crippling shortages of basic commodities, extended power outages, and soaring inflation. So a debt relief is a crucial step for Sudan in its attempt to recover from a deep economic crisis and re-enter the global economy after decades of isolation. The African country sits in a volatile region between the Horn of Africa and North Africa. Its total debt as of the end of 2019 was at least $50 billion, according to the International Monetary Fund, IMF. Sudan is still working with creditors to reconcile its debt up to the end of last year. $5.6 billion is owed to multilateral organizations, including the World Bank and the African Development Bank. An estimated $19 billion is owed to Paris Club creditors, of whom France, Austria, and the United States are the largest. A similar amount is owed to non-Paris Club countries, including Kuwait, which is Sudan's largest creditor at $9.8 billion, Saudi Arabia, and China. Sudan also holds an unusual high amount of debt to commercial lenders, estimated at least $6 billion. So what measures can the African country employ to have the loan reduced? Efforts to address the escalating debt began in the late 2020 after Sudan was removed from the U.S. state sponsors of terrorism list. Then Sudan became eligible for the Highly Indebted Poor Countries HIPC program, which provides debt relief for low-income nations. Tackling Sudan's debt through the HIPC program has been swift, with creditors agreeing to restructure and forgive debt. Indeed, the African country will be seeking relief from wealthy Gulf Arab nations, aiming to get as much as 60% of Sudan's $30 million debt owed to these countries written off. The announcement late Sunday by Finance Minister Jibril Ibrahim came after cash-strapped Sudan received a $14.1 billion debt relief from the Paris Club of Creditor Nations last week. Ibrahim said Khartoum would also ask Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait to reschedule Sudan's remaining debt for 16 years. The talks, he added, would also focus on a 6-year grace period for debt payments. Sudan is in a fragile transition to democracy following a 2019 popular uprising that led to the military's ouster of longtime President Omar al-Bashir. Enoch Sikoli, CGTN.
Well, let's now discuss the prospects for Sudan's economy further with Bartholomew Arma. He is a director of macroeconomy and governance at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Great to have you on the show with us, sir. Now, of course, first and foremost, do you think Sudan is likely to be able to reach similar or an even better agreement with Gulf Arab nations as compared to the one with the Paris Club? Certainly, how effective do you think these debt relief agreements have been in reviving Sudan's battered economy?
Good morning, good afternoon. I think that one way to look at it is that the debt relief that's been provided to Sudan is a bird in hand, and other measures or other debt relief measures from the Gulf states would be complementary. I think that the debt relief measures that are provided to Sudan, which are going to cut its debt by more than half, from 56 billion to about 20 billion, is a significant step in the right direction. And what more importantly, it's accompanied by policy reforms that could actually help avoid a recurrence of the current factors that led to the current situation to begin with. And a big part of this was the fuel subsidies that in 2019 were equal to the total deficits of the country, about 200 million in SDG, in their local currency. The key is to ensure that these subsidies, which began when Sudan when South Sudan had not broken away from Sudan, were a little bit more sustainable at the time because we were able to finance that. But they've continued these subsidies after that breakaway. And Sudan is now basically not able to finance those subsidies in a way that is sustainable. And what that does is that it's crowding out expenditures on social services that people who actually need those subsidies would otherwise receive in the absence of these subsidies. So what is important is really to move to a position where these support to these individuals, families that need them, are actually more targeted, so that you don't subsidize families that don't need them as much as those that do. So this requires really getting better information about the population, the poor, so that the subsidies can be more targeted towards those communities in need. In addition, providing resources to get a lot of these poor people into productive employment. Cash transfers are important, but I think even better is to really link that to productive employment, so that you actually create assets as you support families to sort of take care of themselves and to revive their livelihoods. So yes, I think that it's really a step in the right direction. Recently, the inflation rates have been very high at about 363%. In April, they're kind of coming down, but it is also important that the government be able to mobilize resources domestically to increase its revenues and reduce its deficits, because the deficits are currently being financed by money printing, which is basically fueling inflation. And that doesn't help the poor who are on fixed incomes.
And so on that note, sorry to interrupt you, but my next question to you was, while the progress made on debt relief, debt forgiveness, and certainly this new ambitious reform program, that has all been impressive. But how do you view the country's prospects in terms of attracting new funding and, of course, private investment?
Well, new funding and private investment is a function of the perceptions about the economy, whether the economy is governed in a way that will protect one's investments. So there are reforms that are needed to be taken in the countries to support not only foreign investors, but also domestic private investors. And so the governance is important, ensuring that investments are protected, ensuring that the cost of doing business in Sudan goes down, and showing more transparency and accountability in business transactions. But this also must be underpinned by efforts to strengthen the banking sector and ensure that they are capitalized in a way that they can withstand runs on the banks. Currently, the capitalization of these banks remains questionable. They need to be capitalized to ensure confidence in the banking system. But going back, it's really a function of the credibility of government and the perceived credibility of those governments to actually ensure that the cost of doing business in Sudan is low. This also includes ability to have stability in the prices. The inflation rate that is spiking is not a good incentive for investors. Exchange rates must also be more stable, so that investors, when they want to take their money out, do not incur an exchange rate loss in terms of taking those resources out. So these are efforts that, if effectively implemented, can really bring Sudan back on track in terms of its development trajectory. But it's a long road ahead.
Certainly a long road.
Yes.
And you touched on this a little bit earlier, talking about the bold reforms the current government has made. You talked about floating the currency, of course, government subsidies, a new investment law in place. But a lot of this is putting pressure on the citizens. Some of these reforms are hurting the poor. So how soon before you see some of this ambitious reforms paying off?
The reforms will take a while. So what needs to happen is that in parallel, you need to have a targeted program to support those vulnerable families from falling deeper into poverty, because there's a technical dimension in terms of policy reforms, knowing what the right thing to do, but there's also a political economy dimension, which means that those who suffer from the reforms disproportionately could derail the reform. So it is important to provide those social safety nets, but they have to be targeted, because if you have social safety nets for everybody, basically you're going back to square one in terms of the cost of that. So that is why it's important to have good data on those who are most vulnerable, so that your safety nets are more targeted and more efficient. But it's also, in fact, important to involve communities in tracking expenditures of governments to ensure that resources are spent on what they are more efficiently spent, and that you get the outcomes that are desired from those, so that the money spent wisely was not siphoned in directions that are not supposed to, they're not supposed to go. So citizens' involvement and community involvement in the implementation and utilization of government expenditures, fiscal decentralization, involving communities more in mobilizing resources and utilizing those resources in line with those community priorities are also very critical aspects of the political economy dimension. That is involving them in the resource mobilization and also in the utilization and prioritization of the use of those resources.
Well, we have run out of time, but many thanks for your insights there, Mr. Arma. That, of course, was Bartholomew Arma. He is a Director of Macroeconomy and Governance at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Well, let's shift focus now. Take a look at our corporate headlines today. South Africa's Kumba Iron Ore lowered its 2021 sales forecast as rail constraints and adverse weather at the Saldanha port did hamper first half trading. The company cut its sales targets by 1 million tons to 39 to 40 million tons, but it did retain its production forecast. Now, the South African miner expects half-year earnings to rise by at least 150%, boosted by higher export iron ore prices and a stronger rand to dollar exchange rate. Meanwhile, Kenya's Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture has said plans to lease 5 financially troubled state-owned sugar factories are still on, and that's despite legal hurdles that have stalled the process for more than a year. The lobby group, a Kenya Union of Sugar Plantations and Allied Workers, filed a case stopping the leasing out of these sugar mills. They argued that these state-owned mills must settle pending debts owed to sugar farmers and involve them in the leasing exercise. Meanwhile, Netflix is preparing for a major expansion into video games as subscriber growth slows in its core entertainment streaming business. The key drivers are an increasingly saturated streaming market and the easing of COVID-19 restrictions in many nations, causing consumers to spend less time at home. Now, Netflix is recently hired Facebook executive Mike Verdu, who is a video game industry veteran, to bolster the company's video game team. And finally, video conferencing firm Zoom has struck a multi-billion-dollar deal to buy a cloud-based call center operator in a bet on the future of hybrid working. The firm announced the $14.7 billion acquisition of Five9. Now, Zoom boss Eric Yuan said the deal will allow its customers to reimagine the way they do business. It marks the firm's biggest takeover and comes even though staff are beginning to return to the office. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we're heading into a short break now, but still coming up on the show. Tanzania sets up a task force to explore the introduction of cryptocurrencies. And Africa's Liquid Technologies partners with Facebook to build an extensive long-haul and metro fiber network.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back. Now, Tanzania says it is forming a national blockchain and cryptocurrency task force that will advise the government on the use of the technology. The East African nation's ICT Commission has been given about 14 days to set up a team that will fast-track the process. And as CGTN's Daniel Kijo now reports, the move comes after Tanzania's president signaled an interest in the adoption of cryptocurrencies.
Tanzania wants to join the blockchain and cryptocurrency revolution. The Information and Technology Minister Dr. Ndungulile is forming a task force to research the issue and present its findings to the government. The first order of business for the committee is to identify national priorities.
The task force will also advise on policy and strategic, legal and regulatory issues that we need to work on so that we can fast-track this revolution we want to do.
Gideon started trading cryptocurrency in 2018. He says being one of the first Tanzanian companies in the sector meant he faced many challenges.
And by then, it was not easy even to register a company dealing with cryptocurrency, but this time around, it is just like it is acceptable to register, though still we don't have clear laws that regulate cryptocurrency, by the way.
Bitcoin is a digital currency that exists without a central bank or single administrator. Some experts say since crypto exchanges and cryptocurrencies are a new market, there are gaps that make them ideal for money laundering. Despite the risk, Tanzania's president feels it's better to be prepared. She urged the Bank of Tanzania to prepare and study the cryptocurrency scenario around the world.
It's wise to start working on this technology to just get ourselves ready, so that when it comes in full force, we will be ready. Because we may feel the country is not ready, but our citizens may already be using those systems.
The task force will also advise on a public awareness campaign to educate the public on both blockchain technology and cryptocurrency. Tanzania's central bank had banned cryptocurrencies in November of 2019, saying they were not recognized by Tanzanian laws. But it now says it is adapting following the president's comments. It has not revealed exactly what steps it is taking or when it will reverse that ban. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Meanwhile, Africa's largest fiber company, Liquid Technologies, has partnered with Facebook to build an extensive long-haul and metro fiber network in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Well, as CGTN's Christo Chamringa explains, the new infrastructure is expected to improve internet access for more than 30 million people and also help meet growing demand for regional connectivity across Central Africa.
Under the deal, Facebook and Liquid Technologies will create a digital corridor that stretches from the Atlantic Ocean through the Congo rainforest and into the Indian Ocean. Facebook will invest in the fiber network while Liquid Technologies will own, build and operate it. The project is expected to improve internet access for more than 30 million people and create jobs for over 5,000 Congolese citizens. internet costs in the DRC are prohibitive due to high taxes and the lack of infrastructure. In 2019, the country was ranked as the most expensive to get online by a global coalition called the Alliance for Affordable Internet. Decades of political instability and corruption have left the DRC's telecommunication infrastructure in ruins. But the new project is expected to revive it by lowering the costs of delivering internet services, which would in turn increase the connectivity across the country. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Now, a report by rights group Human Rights Watch says that Kenya's government's cash transfer program, which was aimed to cushion vulnerable people against COVID-19 effects, was crippled by irregularities. President Uhuru Kenyatta announced the $93 million program in May 2020, just 2 months after the East African nation entered a strict lockdown. Here's CGTN's Asta Tal exploring that report.
When Kenya confirmed its first COVID-19 case in March 2020, among other measures it put in place to cushion its citizens was a $93 million nationwide cash transfer program that ran between April and November. A 66-page report by Human Rights Watch, however, now says that only a small fraction of vulnerable families in the country benefited from the program. According to the New York-based rights group, by October last year, of the 600,000 households living in Nairobi's 8 informal settlements, just 29,000 were enrolled in the cash transfer program.
When the coronavirus came, we experienced so many problems because there was just no money.
Human Rights Watch also found that the COVID-19 crisis has devastated many livelihoods since the pandemic hit. It says thousands of individuals and families who lost their only source of income, with business closures and job losses, face the threat of hunger and possible eviction.
This one I'm selling for 18 cents, and the other one in the jerrycan goes for $3. Whenever you're ready, you can choose either.
Although some of Kenya's containment measures have remained in place for over a year, cash transfers and tax relief ended last December.
I am a casual domestic worker. Because of the nature of my job, I can't get any work. I would just boil water and go to sleep with my kids.
Kenya's economy is projected to grow by 4.5% in 2021. It contracted by 0.1% last year. The pandemic has dampened most drivers of demand with private consumption, which is usually the driver of domestic demand in Kenya, now estimated to have slowed markedly in 2020. That's as households reduce spending amid job and income losses. So far, Kenya has recorded over 192,000 infections and 3,775 coronavirus-related deaths since the pandemic began. Asta Tal, CGTN.
Now, the United Kingdom will this week start the mass deportation of Zimbabweans who sought asylum at the height of the country's political upheaval under the late Robert Mugabe. The British envoy in Harare is said to have met Zimbabwe's Foreign Affairs Ministry officials in order to lay the ground for the imminent deportation of about 150 Zimbabweans. The first chartered plane with about 50 deportees is expected in Harare on Wednesday. But of course, there is a spirited campaign by some British legislators to block those deportations. 75 British politicians have written to Home Secretary Priti Patel asking her to stop those deportations of the Zimbabwean nationals, citing the deteriorating political and humanitarian situation in the Southern African nation. And still in Zimbabwe, retailers and manufacturers are sweating on the potential disruptions to supply chains due to the recent violent protests in South Africa. Zimbabwe's northern neighbor is the country's leading trade partner and source of 60% of industrial raw materials. Here's CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya with the details from Harare.
For many years, South African products occupied the bulk of space on supermarket shelves. In recent years, local brands have clawed back some market share, but manufacturers here are still heavily reliant on South Africa for inputs. The Transport Operators Association of Zimbabwe says its members are playing it safe and have stopped their haulage trucks from crossing over into South Africa until the dust settles. That has caused a disruption in the flow of goods in and out of the country. That's expected to create market distortions.
Where there is a disruption in the supply chain, history has taught us that there is a tendency of, demand outpacing supply, and in such an environment, usually prices respond, unfortunately, northwards. So we believe that, of course, the transitory shocks may lead to temporary price movements due to the delays in the raw materials for our key manufacturers and suppliers.
The unrest has also deprived some Zimbabweans working in South Africa of incomes, losses that are likely to be felt by retailers here too.
A lot of Zimbabweans are based there and they send goods and money back home to their families here. That flow of goods and money is likely to be disrupted, reducing the remittances that are keeping consumer demand going in Zimbabwe in quite a big way.
The impact of the violence in South Africa has laid bare Zimbabwe's vulnerability to exogenous shocks and raised the need to diversify its routes to the sea.
It's an opportunity for us to consider whether we are not over-dependent on that South African route. Perhaps we should be looking at bringing in some goods through Walvis Bay, through the Mozambican ports, more of Beira, and maybe utilizing Maputo a little bit more.
It's also vindicated calls for the domestication of production of the most basic commodities, which will avoid consumers being affected by disruptions in other countries so quickly. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now, but still coming up on the show. Amazon founder and billionaire Jeff Bezos makes a successful trip into space. And we look at the impact of China's third child policy.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Quick recap of today's top headlines. Mali's interim president, Assimi Goïta, has survived an attempted stabbing attack. The attempted assassination reportedly occurred during Eid al-Adha prayers at Bamako's Grand Mosque. Now, according to military sources, Goïta's attacker was immediately overpowered by security officers, with investigations into the incident commencing almost immediately. The attack follows months of political turmoil in Mali. Goïta was sworn into power in June after leading the country's second coup in less than a year. And an entire region of Kaduna State in northern Nigeria has been reportedly deserted. About 100 people have been killed in recent attacks in the state. Now, this is despite efforts by the government to end banditry and kidnappings that have led to increased insecurity in different parts of the country. Thousands of inhabitants have sought refuge in several internally displaced persons camps in the state. Meanwhile, Jacob Zuma's corruption trial in South Africa for an arms deal made in the 1990s has been postponed until 10th August. The ex-South African president was jailed earlier this month for 15 months for contempt of court after failing to appear at a separate inquiry into corruption. Now, on Monday, Zuma appeared in court from jail via video link, but called for the case to be pushed back because of the pandemic and recent riots sparked by his arrest. And nearly 200 people have now died from intense flooding in Western Europe. Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands have been hit particularly hard. Rescue efforts continue for the hundreds who are missing in what many say is the worst flooding the region has seen in decades. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Now, first, it was Richard Branson, now Jeff Bezos. 10 days after the founder of Virgin Galactic made his first trip into space, the founder of Amazon has done just the same. Bezos and 3 others were atop a rocket that blasted off Tuesday morning from the Texas desert. It marked the first commercial flight for his company, Blue Origin. Here's CGTN's Hendrik Seabrandy with more from Van Horn in Texas.
We're near Blue Origin's launch site, just down the road from where we're standing, about 40 kilometers north of the town of Van Horn. For years, this company, the brainchild of Jeff Bezos, has been planning for the day when it could send humans, including Bezos, into space. That day is nearly here. A convoy of vehicles enters Blue Origin's tightly secured property. It's a sign that L0 Day, or Launch Day, has just about arrived. The eyes of the world are, or soon will be, on this part of West Texas.
It's a little bit overwhelming. Our hotels are full.
Becky Brewster is the mayor of Van Horn, which has had Blue Origin as a neighbor for well over a decade now, and is about to see years of work up the road pay off firsthand.
You see the Earth from space, it changes you. It changes your relationship with this planet, with humanity. It's one Earth.
Amazon and Blue Origin founder Jeff Bezos has long dreamed of this moment.
I want to go on this flight because it's a thing I've wanted to do all my life. It's an adventure. It's a big deal for me.
He'll be a passenger on the New Shepard, a capsule named for America's first astronaut Alan Shepard, which will be propelled by a rocket more than 100 kilometers into the sky, just beyond Earth's atmosphere, before it drops back down to the ground. Gazing with him through large onboard windows will be his brother Mark and Wally Funk, an 82-year-old aviator who has long wanted to go into space too.
We land gently on the desert surface. We open the hatch and you step outside. What's the first thing you say?
I will say, honey, that was the best thing that ever happened to me.
She'll become the oldest person to go into space. A Dutch teenager will become the youngest, replacing a person who paid $28 million for a seat during a recent auction.
Sold $28 million.
The fact that we're doing this on a private vehicle that is completely privately funded from a private launch site is just something that hasn't been done in this industry before.
Opening the door, Blue Origin hopes, to a bright future of commercial spaceflight.
I firmly believe, though, that as the technology continues to develop, as demand continues to grow, and as capacity continues to grow, I do think we're going to evolve where commercial spaceflight will open up to much more of the population.
This is the first step. Blue Origin has conducted 15 test flights of these capsules and rockets already and declares itself mission ready.
We've looked at all the vehicle systems, including hardware, software, procedures, and launch crew readiness. We are not currently working any open issues, and New Shepard is ready to fly.
Van Horn, which has relied on trains as a major mode of transport until now, stands to gain from what could be a lucrative new industry.
I think this will definitely help. I'm hoping for a slow, steady economic growth. I don't want some kind of boom that's going to come in and completely overwhelm us.
The 4 astronauts will be weightless for about 4 minutes before they drop, with the help of parachutes, back down to Earth. The whole flight will last 10 minutes. Blue Origin says it's planning 2 more of these flights this year because it says the demand is there. Hendrik Seabrandy, CGTN, Van Horn, Texas.
And heading to China now, the country has released a document that outlines more measures to support its third child policy. It adds more details to the announcement in late May that couples will be allowed to have 3 children. The measures seek to encourage more births and abolishes fines for families who have too many children. Other steps include expansion of nursery services and support for families who have lost their only child. The document also aims to narrow the gender gap in workplaces.
The new three-child policy is not just a change in number. More importantly, it has policies to actively support childbirth. The central government has decided to focus on various aspects, including prenatal and postnatal care and universal childcare, education and parenting, to ease the family's burdens and promote their well-being.
Now, Beijing allowed married couples to have 3 children, primarily to halt the declining birth rate in the country. Will the new policy have a significant impact on the country's consumption market, particularly of mother and child care products? Well, CGTN's Zheng Yunfeng finds out.
China has been gradually loosening its birth policies that for decades limited most families to having only 1 child. Since 2016, couples were allowed to have a second child, and from June this year, a third child is also permitted.
When the 2-child policy was introduced in 2016, it has resulted in an extra 5 million babies in the following 18 months. But after that, the birth rate pretty much went back to the pre-policy trend. So the 3rd-child policy will have even smaller impact.
But mother and child care products are still expected to benefit from the 3-child policy, as seen in the surging share prices of listed companies after the policy announcement.
Chinese parents are willing to pay a high premium for quality goods and services for their children. Naturally, there will be higher demand for children's products like toys, baby formulas, medicines.
Industry insiders say in the past 3 years, the number of newborn babies in China have not increased, but sales of infant products have risen significantly, showing a consumption upgrade and a changing pattern.
The main consumption of the maternal and also the infant market had already moved to the post-90s. So the post-90s have their own style of living. They are delivering better life for their kids, no matter it's the first one, second one, or the third one. They are more knowledge-based. So it is not only the product is good, it needs to also deliver certain kind of the emotional linkage with the generation.
Industry insiders say in the near future, China's maternal and infant product market will see more diversified and refined development.
For the post-80s parents, I can sacrifice all myself to the babies. But with the 90s, what we see is they want the family to be better. So it is still, I want to provide the best for my kids, but at the same time, I need to using the best. When the economic, it is have the up and down, but the parents, they are doing their best to providing a little bit upgrade to their certain of the spending level. We call it consumption classification.
Industry insiders also say when married couples agree that they plan to have 2 to 3 kids, they will likely have a more feasible spending plan for the whole family rather than spending everything on 1 child. Zheng Yunfeng, CGTN.
Meanwhile, China's second-hand luxury market is booming as more young and environmentally conscious consumers search for affordable high-end styles. With much of the consumer goods industry increasingly focused on sustainable development, China's second-hand luxury market is growing quickly, as Zhang Shishuan now reports.
Luxury is in, with the affluent among Chinese consumers at malls, online, or even in second-hand shops. Chen Shiyun has been a luxury buyer for more than a decade, but 2 years ago, she started to see the appeal of trading in her second-hand items.
I used to shop like crazy before, but around 2 years ago, I realized I should simplify my life. So I went to those stores and online platforms to have my things appraised. If I liked the prices offered, I sold them, especially the ones that were out of fashion. There are more of these stores nowadays, with some even doing promotions on live streams or WeChat moments.
And while Chen has mainly been a seller of her second-hand luxury goods, there are plenty of others around interested in buying them. One big attraction is the often lowered prices.
I started to buy second-hand luxury 4 or 5 years ago. In the past, I just bought from flagship luxury stores, sometimes even abroad. But now there are more available in China, so I can find my favorite styles in second-hand stores here. There are good quality things, almost new, that can be 6,000 or 7,000 cheaper than their original price. And if the quality is not that good, the price can be less than half the original. I buy 1 or 2 second-hand bags a year.
Bags at this second-hand luxury store in downtown Shanghai usually sell within a month after their previous owners part with them. Business has been so brisk since last year that the company has expanded from just 1 store before the COVID outbreak to 5 now across China.
Both collecting and selling second-hand luxury products is going well. Since the outbreak, some people may have needed money quickly, so they've sold things to us. And also, due to the pandemic, people were not able to go abroad, so many chose to shop in China. What really matters in the pricing is the item's popularity, and of course its quality and how long it's being used for.
Jen adds that vintage products, say those more than 15 years old, has seen a big rise in prices since last year. Some even doubling or tripling in value.
A recent report from Bain & Company shows that Chinese consumers will account for nearly half of the global luxury market by 2025. Sales of second-hand luxury goods in China, however, only accounted for 5% of the nation's overall luxury market in 2019, compared with 28% in Japan and more than 30% in the US. So there's plenty of room for the market to grow, both online and offline.
More than 30% of luxury purchasers in China are from the younger generations, Generation Z or Generation Alpha, many of whom look at sustainability as a new fashion in itself. The key lies in attracting their attention to the market.
China consumers, they are not that well educated to consume the second-hand products. So the maintenance, the service after that is really very important. And also to keep still a very good theme of the vintage offerings and to keep the consumers be aware that it's worthwhile to purchase those goods. Even for the second-hand luxury, you still need to keep the experience and also the life occasion for the purchasers. So not because it is the second-hand luxuries, it means you don't care its branding, the life essence, and also the lifestyle behind that.
Luxury brands are well aware of the growing attraction of second-hand products in China. Gucci China Trading has just added second-hand daily product retail to its business scope. And online retail is also now in the market in a big way. Started as a live streaming store selling luxury products on Taobao in 2016, Feiyu shifted its focus to the second-hand luxury market 2 years later. The company completed $30 million of Series B financing last month. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
And shifting focus now, the COVID-19 pandemic has dealt a huge blow to the theatre industry. The sector is now looking for a good run in the summer as audiences return. However, management are still not confident about letting their guard down. Many of them say continued caution is the best approach. Here's Guy Henderson reporting from London.
It's been a dark 17 months for the Questors Theatre in West London. The lights are now back on though, and audiences are steadily returning. For the cast of The Children, the pandemic's been a massive slap in the face. Director Roger Beaumont isn't the first to suggest there has not been enough state support for the trade.
Because they've done our best to kill us.
Beaumont hopes the worst is over.
It's just been a very tough time for everybody involved in theatre across the board. So it's a great joy to be coming out of that. Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And a relief, a great relief.
Yeah. The venue's director, Alex Marker, is still wary though. With coronavirus cases surging, management's decided continued caution is the best approach.
We prepared our summer season on the proviso that we're still capping audiences at 120. People are still wearing masks. People are still socially distanced and the one-way system stays in practice. And casts are 6 or under in the play because, you know, we didn't want to be in the position where we were told 100% capacity could happen and then say, well, actually, no, it's 50% this week.
Monday's been dubbed Freedom Day. That's not quite how they're framing it here. The Questors Theatre is looking forward to a good run this summer, but they'll keep social distancing in place even after the 19th of July, when most restrictions are eased in England. That's what these red banners on the seats are for. And the management here still aren't entirely certain what could come next. Neither are some of the most famous theatre companies in the land. The Royal Shakespeare Companies built a whole new outdoor space in a nod to the possibility of continued uncertainty. The British government's chief medical officer, Chris Whitty, is amongst the experts who've warned the pandemic is far from over. And so, back at Questors, it's still more of a steady trickle arriving for the evening's performance.
Does it feel weird being back in the theatre, or are you very comfortable about that?
Pretty comfortable. I mean, look, I've got your cameraman with him 2 metres off me, but we're outside, so it's fine.
Yeah, but even inside, last time, you were left. It was social distance inside. They only sold 50 tickets per night for that one. I think it was very low.
It's tough.
And you're allowed, obviously, as you are indeed on public transport, masks off for food or drink.
The British government's promise was that after 3 lockdowns, there'd be no more going round in circles. England's theatres are hoping for the best, but still preparing for something short of it. Guy Henderson, CGTN, West London.
And shifting focus now, here's a look at commodity markets today. Oil prices extending the previous session's steep slide. They were pressured by concerns that rising COVID-19 infections could weaken demand again, just when OPEC Plus is increasing supply. Brent crude was just shy of dropping below $70 a barrel today. Meanwhile, gold edging higher as Treasury yields continue to decline. Traders say the precious metal is set to continue climbing as new waves of COVID-19 challenge assumptions about the pace of a global economic recovery. And that's giving investors a reason to think about havens such as gold. Well, let's take a quick break now. Still coming up. Nigerian sculpture showcases creative works made from plastic waste.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, in Nigeria, plastic waste management has been a growing concern, which is yet to develop a culture of waste sorting, as the country is yet to develop a culture of waste sorting and disposal. This puts the West African nation at high risk of environmental degradation. But a young artist and waste enthusiast is now leading a creative path in order to change that narrative. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam with their story.
31-year-old sculptor Dalong Peter is redefining art with plastic. It's a material many here would categorize as waste. Peter's been unleashing his creativity, bringing out beautiful artworks, from pen holders to butterflies, crocodiles and other decorative and functional items.
I saw these plastic bottles. I saw that they are good material that could be used in sculpture production, and I felt that I can use them in my studio work. I pick out this plastic, I started using them in the studio, and I'll say, this is really a wonderful material. Then I now go online. I discover that there are people who have explored on these plastic bottles before. That's when I have a broader view of the use of this material.
Recent research showed that by 2050, plastic will outnumber the fishes in the ocean. Saving the ecosystem inspired the art enthusiast to find good use for plastic waste. Although his work is getting noticed across Nigeria, with eager customers keen to purchase some of his artworks, Peter's dreams are bigger than just making sales and profits.
This now, my thoughts towards this plastic recycling is that I don't really see it as where I can really gain, or I'm just doing it for the monetary aspect for now. I'm just doing it for the joy of my art practice. I'm just doing it for the joy of plastic exploration. In years to come now like this, my thoughts is to open a recycling academy. So for me to have a recycling academy where I'm going to be teaching youths on how to recycle these plastic bottles. And if you teach the youth at this stage, before they reach perhaps a certain stage, you discover that the knowledge they're having towards recycling is going to be broader. And you discover that we're working towards that zero waste in our environment.
Nigeria generates 2.5 million tons of plastic waste yearly. This provides a huge opportunity for plastic recycling in Nigeria, but only a few artists are tapping into it. And that's because the equipment needed to start production is costly for most starters. Peter is hoping to support budding artists like himself to drive awareness for recycling and give them a chance to earn a living and save the environment from further degradation. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Jos, Plateau, Nigeria.
Well, before we leave you today, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand steadying today. It was struggling for momentum as fears that the fast-spreading Delta variant of the coronavirus will harm the global economic recovery, and that drove investors to seek comfort in the US dollar today. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.